not sure I'm the best person to give this talk. I'm sure there's many in the audience who have more experience than me, but I appreciate Pauline's invitation. I was the co-editor of the Journal of Interactive Marketing for about 5 years, about a decade ago. I also just co-edited a special issue on big data from the Journal of Advertising. So I have a bit of experience with the journals, and I'll share some of those experiences with you. The way I thought I would start out with this talk is to share with you how editors see things. Okay, and so if you understand how how editors are evaluated, that will help, I think, you in understanding how to make their life easier, if you will. All right. So with the Journal of Interactive Marketing, I still sit on the board, and once a year we have a board meeting. So all of the former editors show up. There's a triad. So the editors are part of the editorial team. There's a publisher. So in the case of JIM, it's Elsevier. And then there's a sponsoring organization. Usually there's some organization like the American Marketing Association or whatever that sponsors the journal. In our case, it used to be the Direct Marketing Association. Now it's the Data Marketing Association, I think. So the DMA. Okay, so we all show up in a room, and they give us a big report, and we kind of evaluate the state of the journal and make recommendations for the future. So what you need to understand is what the editor gets evaluated on. And so what the editor cares about is, first metric that comes out is how are we doing in citations? Okay, so are the articles that you're publishing having an impact in the academic community? And the most important measure is citations with the different metrics. So Google Scholar as well as the Web of Science. Impact factors are, of course, on the first slide as well. And so you get the little bar charts that show, JIM's impact factor has been going like this for the past 2 decades, and it's been a wonderful experience to be with that. Another thing that journals really care about is recognition. It's like one of JIM's current goals is to get listed in the Financial Times top 50 journals. So we want to be one of the premier journals, and that's what an editor cares about. The other thing that especially the publisher and the sponsoring organization care about are the number of downloaded articles, because that means money. Yeah, all right, so that's what an editor cares about. Another thing that an editor cares about is definitely keeping the sponsoring organization happy, which in this in the case of JIM, we were sponsored by the Direct Marketing Association to be the thought leadership arm of that industry. Our mission was to publish research that was going to advance what companies in that industry could do. All right, and that was very much a consideration whenever I had an article. If I had an article that wasn't really advancing direct marketing, broadly speaking, or interactive marketing, that would be a reason to reject it. So I get a paper that I could tell had been rejected in an economics journal that had almost, they couldn't spell direct marketing, and maybe it was a good work, but I wasn't interested. We're also trying to build or maintain a brand. So JIM has a brand, Journal of Advertising is a separate brand, Marketing Science is a different brand, and we're trying to kind of maintain that brand through the articles that we select. And I'll just mention that I think a lot of these things should be aligned with the author's goals. Your goal as an author should be to change the world. You want to publish something that's going to change the way things are done in your industry. So you want to have impact. So the goal is not I just want to get published in a journal. The goal is I want to have impact, and that's basically what your editor also cares about. So how do you achieve these goals? How does an editor? What levers does an editor have to achieve these goals? Well, first off, you want to track great research. Number one, I want the best articles in my journal. And notice I'm not saying I want the best authors, I want the best articles. Because I would publish articles from obscure authors if it was great research, because that was something that I knew it was going to get cited. Another thing that an editor has under his or her control is the mission vision page of the journal. So pay attention to that when you submit to that journal. Go read the mission and the vision, and make sure your research is going to fit within that. So if it's a well-run journal, they're going to have a well-articulated mission, and you want to align with that. Another thing that editors do, once a year we would write an editorial, and we would just say, here's what we think is really important. And so pay attention to those editorials, because the editor is saying, I want articles on this topic because I think it's going to be an important area for the future. And so if I think the way I approached it when I was a young author is, I had an interesting project, now I'm going to go try to find a place to publish it, as opposed to, this is a very important topic. I want to do my research on that topic, and then start with that. Another thing that I really love are special issues. So every year JIM does at least one special issue. Purpose of this is to have research on up-and-coming areas. It's often more difficult to get something published if you don't have a lot of literature out there as a foundation. And so we would just tee up we did a special issue on social media back in 2012 because it was an emerging area, and we wanted to encourage research in that area. So there's a lot of benefits on this. First off, you're going to make the editor happy. It's a good topic. I say it's a finite accelerated review process. So a lot of the work I do, I target these special issues because I know it's not going to have more than 2 rounds. And the 2 rounds the editor kind of has a date in mind for that issue, and they're going to hit that date. So the review process is often 1.5 years, as opposed to, my God, I've had like 3-year review, endless review cycles when you just go through the normal process. And often there's higher acceptance rates. So maybe there isn't as much research on this emerging topic, so the journal normally has a 5% acceptance rate, but here there may be a 20 or 30% acceptance rate at the end of the day. So really pay attention to these special issues. It will accelerate the time from submission to publication. So impactful research. I guess 3 questions that I would always ask myself when I was skimming through a new article. So is the knowledge new? Is there anything new in here? Is it true? So what do I mean by true? Does it have any validity? Now, as a young scholar, I thought that one was those first 2 were really important, right? Make sure I have good internal and external validity. Make sure I got a really good method and it's airtight. No threats to validity and all of that. I think the 3rd one's probably the most important, which is it interesting? And often I would, as a young scholar, neglect that. I think as an editor, I would be much more inclined to take a chance on something that was innovative and was going to advance the field, because it was identifying this new area, even if it had a few little problems with internal validity. Okay, well, acknowledge that in the limitation section of your paper. I want the paper because it's interesting and it's timely. So that's a big one for me. How to get to this interesting and important then? Pay attention to editorials. One kind of guiding principle I have is look for where there's change. So wherever there's change happening, so platforms, that's kind of a new thing. Wherever there is change, there will be a vacuum. Okay? There will not be research out there, and you can easily make a contribution in a new area. If you're working in an area that's 20 years old, The problem you're going to have is that very smart people have been picking over that area for the past 20 years. And maybe you can. There's a little meat left on the bone, but it's much harder. Another thing that I didn't do enough when I was young, but I think I'm doing a better job now, is keeping up with what's happening in the real world. And so, our research, we are in a very applied field. We're not doing pure probability theory, where it doesn't have to necessarily link to the real world. Our stuff has to connect. Now, if you want to go into journal and consumer research, they don't care about applications, and that's fine. But most of our journals care about the real world, so make sure it connects with the real world. So read Brian Sternthal, former editor of Journal of Consumer Research, shared this tip with me when I was a postdoc. Read the newspaper. And just keep up with what's going on. Read the trade press, talk to practitioners. So tips on positioning. I'm going to make sure I'm on time here. We have about 5 minutes. So position the article for the journal you're submitting it to. So are you citing articles from that journal? Are you using methods and theories that are relevant to that journal? If you've got an article on services, there probably ought to be something about co-creation and service-dominant logic in there if you're going to send it to a service journal. Don't just send an article to a service journal because I got rejected somewhere else and that's on the A list. Make sure that the methods are relevant for that journal. So if you're doing qualitative research, JCR is a great place. Don't send it to marketing science. I know that's kind of obvious. But if you're doing econometric models, marketing science is the place for you. Don't take it to, So does the article fit with the editorial mission? Read the journal before submitting it. So I'm working with my Turkish PhD student, Özge, and we're going to send it to JASA, the Journal of the American Statistical Association. They handle things like the literature review very differently. The literature review gets kind of squeezed into the introduction. That's not the way we do things in marketing. But, we've kind of pointed that out to her, and so she's written the article to follow the format of what's expected of the reviewers and the readers in that field. All right? When positioning, lean towards the new and exciting. I have another PhD student. We have data from newspapers on engagement. And basically she's building churn models. But I would not position this as a churn model paper because churn models are as old as the hills. And if I'm an editor or an ICO, another paper on churn models. Boring. So you got to find a way to make that, what's new about this churn model? Well, we're bringing engagement data in. We're saving democracy. Whatever. You got to find something that's more interesting than this beating a dead horse type of positioning. Another thing that is really important is work on your literature review. So as a reviewer of articles, it just drives me crazy when I get this article and it's clear that the scholar hasn't read what's already out there. So synthesize what's already out there, show that you've mastered that, cite the most important articles in that area. By the way, your reviewers are probably going to be the authors of those articles, and there's nothing that pisses off a reviewer more than not seeing his or her name cited if they have a seminal article in that area. So that's like it's an easy thing you can avoid. And clearly show what's new about your work. So one of the things that's really common in marketing journals, at least, is to give a table like this. So you've probably seen many of these tables before. And basically what you have is a bunch of issues at the top. And here are the key references. And your article is at the top. And by the way, your article is the only one that does everything. Right? So this paper was a classic, but oh my God, they didn't study this issue. This one's another one, but they missed this issue. All right, that makes the positioning and your contribution very clear. Here's another table that I did, all the classic ones, and then here's my study, and of course I get check marks and everything. All right, just a few tips on the writing. And I'm going to say that working with a lot of non-native speakers, these are not issues that require fluency in English. So my Turkish student drops articles all the time. Adding an article is very easy for me. These are much harder. So very early in the article, say 3 things. What problem are you studying? Why is it important? What's your contribution? Okay, get to that early. I can remember as an editor reading articles where I got 10 pages in and I don't know what the article's going to do. And at that point I'm ready to just desk project. Okay? So keep those things. I'm impatient. I don't have it forever. I'm getting a bunch of articles every day. Or as a reviewer, I have to, I want to know, what problem is this? Why is it important? And how do you contribute? Another really important thing is define your terms and use them consistently. So I'm going to pick on my poor PhD student, but this article that she just wrote used 4 different words that meant the same thing. So in section 1, I guess she was in mood to use this term. Section 2, she used this other term. Section 3, and as a reader, you wonder, well, is there a difference between those? And she didn't really say. And so, after weeks of just beating on her to, pick one term and use it, and define it, by the way. Tell me what you mean by that, because often these terms are ambiguous. Be precise with your language. What's the most important part of an article? The title and the abstract. So one thing that I used to be very bad about was, I'd spend months and months writing an article, and then sort of an hour before I submit it, I throw together the abstract. That's the wrong way to go, because what's going to happen is the first thing the editor is going to look at, and maybe the only thing the editor is going to look at, is your abstract. They'll look at your abstract and say, oh, this is boring desk project. So that ought to be something that you spend a lot of time on. Every word in that abstract should be carefully thought out. Make sure that you're capturing what the thing does. The other thing about this is many people in the future will only read your abstract. They will not pay for the article. The abstract is free. They're looking for something to cite. Okay, well, I can read the abstract. It looks like this paper does this, and they'll drop it in. Of course, none of us would do that, right? All right. Conceptual frameworks, that's something else I didn't know early on in my career, are usually really helpful. So here's like a conceptual framework from Jenny Van Doren's article. It's been cited 1,500 times. If you get the right conceptual framework, the article just writes itself. You read her article, she just kind of, she has this, that's the roadmap of the article, and there's different sections that talk about the different pieces. So really work on the conceptual framework. A few more tips. So Don Knuth, the very famous computer scientist, talked about how do you write an article in a computer science journal, and he said that you should write it as if you were walking through the forest with a friend, explaining this research to a friend who's not a specialist in this area, and you have to use kind of plain language, and you can't rely on a bunch of equations and that. You have to speak plain language. So this is a metaphor I often use. You're walking through a forest with a friend telling about your research. How would you do that? Another really important point is tell a story. My Turkish student cannot tell a story. So, one sentence has to lead to the next one. I need certain information to understand this paragraph. Well, that means that the information has to get introduced in the previous paragraph. Don't have too many distractions. Stay focused, right? So, if you introduce a bunch of information that's not important, and I spend all this cognitive effort to try to understand the stuff that's unimportant, I get really angry as a reviewer. All right. Another thing that, with telling a story, one of the key aspects of storytelling is tension. There has to be some tension in this. So there has to be a villain. In the case of my recommendation system stuff, the computational complexity is the villain. My method is the hero. I know that sounds sort of maybe too simple, but it makes for engaging reading if you can establish here's the tension, and then you can resolve it. Another thing I say is seduce the reader. Don't fight the reader, seduce the reader. I've cited an article here that I got as an editor, and I remember getting this article from some unknown scholars. By the end of the first page, I was in love with the article. I wasn't sure what the contribution was, but I was in love with the article, and I wanted to see it published. And I did publish it, and then after a round of review, it's been cited. I just checked yesterday. It's been cited 300 times now, roughly. So it was a good article. But I just this is an example where I just got seduced into loving this article about brand performance in social media. And then don't forget about future research and implications. What I mean by that is point out where there's additional meat on the bone, because that's going to get you cited. You've identified this key problem. You've taken a big advance in that area. But if you can kind of show where here's more, your article is going to get cited many times as a consequence of that. I should probably stop right there. I was just going to mention, this was an article that I came across about economics journals by James Heckman, who's a very famous economist at the University of Chicago. He talks about the tyranny of the top 5 journals, and getting published in the top 5 economics journals is a near requirement for tenure, but it's a poor measure of research quality and system that punishes creativity. So I guess my advice is kind of the same as James Heckman's. Do research on stuff that you think is important, that you think is interesting, and don't be a slave to the editors of the top 5 journals. You'll find a place to publish it eventually, but I guess that's the philosophy I've always followed: is do something that you think is interesting. Thanks.